We are in Chichester Harbour on a quest to investigate strange secrets and mysterious goings-on in a small seaside resort on the south coast of England. Although fairly anonymous today, Hayling Island was once famed as a sacred island. It had a Celtic settlement and was well known throughout the ancient world for the fine quality of the salt, produced in salt pans situated along the island's eastern shore. My Lord's Pond is a picturesque inlet on the island, bordered on its northern edge by a little-known Iron Age fortress called Tornabury. At the top of this stretch of water stands Pond Head House, which was recently the focus for a midsummer pilgrimage by members of the Neville Shute Norway Appreciation Society, whose members came from across the world to celebrate the life and times of Neville Shute, the former owner of the house. Author and scientist Shute produced some of his best work here and was allegedly a special government advisor on the recovery of historic artifacts. The visitors displayed tremendous knowledge of the author's life, but it's unlikely that any of them knew of Shute's clandestine activities here during the early years of World War II. Apparently, while German bombs rained down on nearby Portsmouth dockyard, Shute and his friends held secret midnight gatherings in local boat stores and this ancient salt house on the water's edge. It's said that Shute's gardener, Charlie Wilson, stood guard while these sober, middle-aged men held seances to contact the spirits of monks who had lived and died here almost 8 centuries earlier. So what was the purpose of these strange gatherings at a time of national emergency? Waterman Frank Dunster has lived and worked on Chichester Harbour for many years, operating a waterborne breakdown, rescue and salvage service for yachtsmen and fishermen in the area. Recently, Frank joined forces with filmmaker Robin Walton and writer Victor Pearce-Jones to bring us an astonishing tale which goes back to biblical times and the very heart of Western civilization. I'm Wendy Evans, and when I joined the team, Frank took me on a tour of the area to explain the origins of the story and those strange gatherings in the salt house all those years ago. What follows is a record of our researches into Hayling's secret past, its place in history, and some intriguing questions about the final resting place of the Holy Grail. To understand the background to the seances, we must go back much farther in history, to events in the Holy Land in the 1st century AD, just a few years after the crucifixion. Following a series of Jewish uprisings, the occupying Roman forces totally destroyed the city of Jerusalem in AD 70. At the same time, they removed a vast hoard of treasure and precious objects from the temple. It was believed, however, that they missed the most valuable items, which the priests had hidden in deep tunnels. The Dead Sea Scrolls, found in caves at Qumran beside the Dead Sea in 1952, confirm that around 65 tons of silver and 26 tons of gold were hidden under the temple prior to the Roman onslaught. The bulk of the treasure looted by the Romans was in turn plundered by the Visigoths when they sacked Rome in 410 AD. They brought it back here to their lands in the south of France, where it became the focus of some extraordinary events over the following 1500 years. In earlier Roman times, this area of France had a very large indigenous Jewish population, particularly in the region around Marseille. And legend has it that Mary Magdalene fled here after the crucifixion with other members of Christ's family. Their descendants are alleged to have intermarried with the Visigoths, who was succeeded by the Merovingian dynasty, which later ruled this part of southern France. Some believe that this creates a continuous link between the Jewish house of Judah, the subsequent French royal house, and the bloodline for the entire European nobility, which may play a crucial part in our story. This remote mountainous area of the old Visigoth kingdom in the Languedoc region of southern France is absolutely riddled with natural caves and abandoned mines. It's a favoured location for the lost Jerusalem treasure, originally looted by the Romans and latterly the Knights Templar. The noble families of 11th century France were well aware of their perceived Judaic heritage, and in 1096 they launched the first crusade to the Holy Land. The reasons for the crusades were threefold. Firstly, to liberate the holy places. Secondly, much of the treasure of Jerusalem and antiquity still lay buried beneath the site of the old temple of King Solomon. And last, but not least, a large cache of ancient documents and artifacts was known to be hidden there. Soon after the capture of Jerusalem, a group of influential French noblemen, closely allied to the Cistercian religious order, created the Knights Templar. Their avowed aim was to guard the pilgrim routes to the Holy Land, but their real objective was to concentrate on the discovery of the remaining temple treasure, digging a vertical shaft down through solid rock to a hidden burial chamber. It took the Crusaders almost 30 years to clear all of the Holy Land of booty. This was then removed from Palestine and shipped back to France. Over the centuries, much thought has been given to the true nature of these discoveries and their ultimate resting place. The financial backing and the technology for the explosion in cathedral and abbey building throughout Europe in the period immediately following the Crusade almost certainly benefited from the spoils. However, although some treasure has been found, the bulk of it has always remained hidden. But the ultimate prize has always been to unravel the mystery of the Holy Grail. The Grail mystery has become the focus of a lifelong search by Frank Dunster, but the subject has fascinated Western man for almost 1,000 years. The story has gained increased resonance over the past 20 years and inspired a great mass of literature and a whole range of theories. The legend of the Grail has been recounted in various forms for centuries, particularly in the Arthurian legends and the stories of the early wanderings of Jesus and Joseph of Arimathea. The Holy Grail is generally depicted as the cup used by Jesus at the Last Supper, or the chalice which held his blood. But some believe that the name Holy Grail stems from the French Saint Graal, a contraction of Saint Graal or Saint Grial, holy blood, which is understood by some to refer to the royal bloodline of the descendants of the Merovingian dynasty, and thence back to the royal house of Judah. It's unlikely, however, that the long sought-after prize is Christ's cup at the Last Supper. There is no doubt that treasure is involved, and almost certainly long-hidden documents, which some researchers believe hold secrets of world-shattering importance, maybe referring to that royal bloodline. There are also believed to exist among these documents ancient writings containing scientific secrets of the greatest significance. These, together with the treasure, were the reason for the séance at Pond Head. They were also the subject of extensive searches made in the south of France, at the same time by German occupying forces who were reconnoitring the area since well before the outbreak of war. In the 12th and 13th centuries, the Knights Templar were deeply involved with this part of France. They held vast estates in the area and established a stronghold at Compagne-sur-Aude. At the height of their power, they wielded massive influence. They were great landowners and medieval shipping magnates, amassing enormous riches as the virtual bankers to Europe and the Levant. Ultimately, this made them very unpopular in many circles, especially with the French king Philippe le Bel, who was deeply in debt to them and had his eyes on their accumulated wealth and secrets.
With the support of Pope Clement V, charges of heresy were brought against them. This was a signal for a coordinated attack against the Templars in October 1307, but when it happened, the cupboard was bare. Not only had all of the treasure been spirited away, but also the Templar fleet and most of the knights as well, and much of the treasure may have ended up 700 miles further south in the Templar stronghold of southern France. It's not known what became of the fleet, which was based at La Rochelle on the Atlantic coast. It probably dispersed to a number of locations, including Portugal. But it is known that some important elements headed for the British Isles and sanctuary in Scotland.
However, we might question whether the largest and most precious items would have been risked on a 400-mile journey over land from Paris to La Rochelle in the west, followed by a hazardous voyage north through the Irish Sea to Scotland during the heavy autumn storms. Would it not have been more prudent to take the safer option of moving the bulkiest treasures to the friendly Abbey of Jumier? Then, when the conditions were right, slipping down the Seine at night and across the Channel to the safety and anonymity of Hayling Island.
On first acquaintance, Hayling seems like a pleasant, not particularly remarkable seaside place. It's about 5 miles long, quite prosperous with 18,000 inhabitants, but it's always lived in the shadow of Britain's premier naval port.
The city of Portsmouth, with its hinterland brimming in ancient buildings and traditions, reflects our naval history from the Romans to the present day. The Solent and Spithead symbolise action and adventure. Over the centuries, many great expeditions have started out from the harbour mouth. Henry V sailed from Portsmouth on his way to Agincourt, Nelson to Trafalgar, armies to the Crimea, the Boer War and 2 world wars. And in 2003, 2 decades after the Falklands campaign, the fleet was on the move once more. Portsmouth history is reflected in the waterfront buildings and heritage sites. Hayling, on the other hand, is really quite ordinary and for the most part architecturally unremarkable. It has just a few buildings of any real interest, 2 nice churches and some attractive cottages. Apart from that, the island does boast 2 blue flag beaches and is a major international sailing centre. It was also the birthplace of board sailing in 1958, and so the sea has always had great significance for Hayling. As a nation, we tend to overlook the fact that, historically, Britain was never as cut off in terms of trade and culture as we have been led to believe from the history books.
From the earliest times, there was a constant to and fro between our near neighbours across the Channel, with whom we share a common Celtic heritage. This was further underlined by the close family relationships between our respective royal houses. It's also worth considering that before the Industrial Revolution, the quickest way to get from A to B was often by sea. Contact was further enhanced by the prevailing southwesterly wind, which enabled ships to sail from the mouth of the Seine to our own southern shores in one reach without having to tack. And before the development of the larger boats, Hayling and Chichester harbours were natural landfalls for such voyages, and they were the locations for the first Roman landings here in AD 43. Hayling in ancient times was a rather special place. Victor Pearce-Jones has written extensively about Hayling's past, and he tells me that our Celtic predecessors built a substantial Iron Age fortress on the edge of My Lord's Pond and a major temple here on North Hayling. Following the Roman invasion, they built an impressive temple with a 7-storey tower on the site of the earlier Celtic temple. This coincided with the development of Fishbourne Palace on the mainland. Some historians believe that such a major construction may well have been intended to house some of the scrolls and objects which had been removed from the Jerusalem temple. 2 excavations were carried out on the site. Talford Ely from University College of London made the first dig in the early 20th century. Working alone, Ely excavated an area of 130 by 140 feet, revealing foundations of a substantial building. His findings were confirmed by later work in the 1970s. The temple, with its massive 7-storey tower, is thought to have been the largest in Britain, but it apparently collapsed or was demolished at the end of the 2nd century. Nothing now remains of the temple, but some of the materials were used later here in the construction of St. Peter's Church, and other remains can be seen in local walls.
A 1,000 years after the Roman occupation, the Normans also had a profound effect on our locality. We visited northern France to explore 2 places which have made significant contributions to the history of Hayling Island.
The Abbey of Jumièges was a major centre for the education of the nobility on both sides of the Channel from the 9th century on. William the Conqueror's cousin, Edward the Confessor of England, was educated here in Normandy, and after the conquest, King William gave Hayling to the abbey. Of course, its position here, on a loop of the River Seine, made access to our island relatively simple. Interestingly for our search, the Count of Jumièges was one of the leaders of the First Crusade a century later.
Originally founded in the 7th century under the patronage of the Merovingian King Clovis, Jumièges had its heyday under the Norman kings. It's intriguing to find the 4 keys device still displayed so prominently here. This was originally the Royal Abbey of Jumièges, and the keys defined its role as guardian of the secrets of the Merovingian bloodline. Known as the Keys of David, the image has for centuries been closely connected to Scottish Rite Freemasonry. The emblem was later adopted into Hayling's own crest, and a particularly fine example can be found today in the uniform of the Hayling School.
Another site of great significance to our quest is Gisors Castle on the Normandy border. This was the headquarters of the Priory of Sion, successors to the Order of Sion who initiated the Crusades. The Order also founded the Knights Templar, who were charged with recovery of the temple treasures after the First Crusade.
The Priory of Sion, by the way, is a mysterious, closed, secret society with extensive and powerful connections. It sits at the very heart of the affair of the Holy Grail and is still active politically after almost 800 years. Significantly for our story, John of Gisors was first Grand Master of the Priory of Sion. He founded the church, now the Cathedral of St. Thomas in Portsmouth, and is credited with the development of Portsmouth Harbour. He was an extremely influential man, owning lands throughout the area, and there is little doubt that he had a profound effect on local history. We also believe he may well have had a hand in the founding of our own Priory Church of St Mary's.
Glastonbury and Roslin are recognised as major sites in the search for the Holy Grail, but it's reasonable to suppose that great secrets that could markedly affect mankind wouldn't be hidden in obvious places, and care would be taken to keep them away from treasure seekers. After all, Rennes-le-Château was originally a very modest place indeed. On the other hand, signs would be left for future generations so that the secrets wouldn't be lost forever. Hayling abounds in these signs for those with eyes to see, especially here in St Mary's Church. This Anglo-Saxon font is probably the oldest object in the church. It's believed it was originally the base of a Saxon cross, which was later hollowed out and inverted to form a bowl. The Reverend Charles Hardy installed it close to the pulpit, but it was later on set on an octagonal base and moved to its current symbolic position close to the main door by Charles Clark. Formerly Hardy's Cures and confidant, Clark is buried next to Hardy with a Templar's cross on his grave. By the way, this was the favoured location for freestanding pillars employed by the builders of the ancient Temple of Solomon in Jerusalem. The base is quite simple, almost modern in style. But then, the octagon was the chosen form of the Knights Templar. Now I wonder if it's hollow. That was a favourite method for the concealment of secret documents from early Judaic times right up to the discoveries made in Rennes-le-Château. This is the splendid west window. We might question the significance of the picture of St John with its bold image of the Jewish menorah, that is the sacred seven-branched lamp plundered from the Jerusalem temple by the Romans in 70 AD. And I wonder, who are all these regal figures on the central columns? The half-serpent, half-human effigy of the Green Man on the font is also quite unique. And what about the strange sea serpent carving beside the vestry? This is the fabulous Bestia Neptuni, another direct reference to the Merovingian bloodline. There are further significant carvings on this ancient manorial pew, which originally belonged to the Torque family, bailiffs of the manor of Hayling in the 15th century. They feature Masonic symbols of the Tor cross and 3 coiled ropes, strangely incorporated into a piece crafted well before the introduction of Freemasonry to England by King James, a century and a half later. The Tor cross, or T, is the 19th letter of the Greek alphabet and the last letter of the Hebrew alphabet, and in ancient times it symbolised the deity. Also known as the Sun Cross, it subsequently represented the T-square in Masonic ritual. These 3 coiled ropes are symbolic of the descent of the knight into the secret vault, one rope around his waist and the others in either hand, one to lower me down into the vault and the other to pull me up. That is pretty strong imagery for a parish church in the late Middle Ages. So here we have a substantial parish church, built at a time when the island had no more than a few hundred inhabitants, and yet displaying all these fascinating images. Clearly, our island holds some fascinating secrets, but are they hidden here at St Mary's, or should we be looking further afield, a mile down the road at Tornabury on the shores of Chichester Harbour? However, let's first take a look at those other places that feature in the search for the Holy Grail. Scholars and treasure seekers have spent centuries trying to unravel the Grail mystery, its significance and its final whereabouts. Sites generally favoured are at Rennes-le-Château in southern France, Roslin Chapel near Edinburgh and Glastonbury Abbey in the West Country. Victor, what did you think of Rennes-le-Château?
I was very impressed by the village, by the interior of the church and Saunier's own house. clearly out of scale with the rest of the village. Something remarkable must have happened there. This tiny windswept village lies in the mountainous Cathar region of the Languedoc. With around 200 inhabitants, it didn't become known internationally until quite recently, when talk of the activities of its priest during the 1890s made it the ultimate target for students of the Grail mysteries.
Apparently, during repairs to the church, the priest Abbé Béranger Saunière made some momentous discoveries. Possibly prompted by outside agents, he had searched for many years and eventually made discoveries that provided him with an astonishing amount of revenues over the following decades. He built himself a fine house and a garden, plus the imposing Tour Magdala to house his fine collection of ancient books and manuscripts. And as we've seen on our visit, the proceeds of his discoveries enabled him to really indulge himself. Apart from his house, he completely renovated the Church of St. Mary Magdalene in the most opulent fashion, spending extravagantly on sculptures and decoration.
The original Glastonbury Abbey must have been a truly magnificent place. However, despite some interesting finds over the years and its historic connection to Joseph of Arimathea, it was perhaps too grand to be the last resting place of the Grail. Interestingly, for our own story, the former abbot of Glastonbury was Henri de Blois, the younger brother of King Stephen. He married the daughter of the Crusader Count of Jumier and later became Bishop of Winchester at the time of the construction of the churches on Hayling Island. As we have seen, when the Knights Templar were suppressed, they may well have transported much of their treasure and archives to Scotland, where they received lands and sanctuary from the Scottish king Robert the Bruce. Roslin Chapel was built near Edinburgh in 1446 by Earl William St Clair as a testimony to the beliefs and traditions of the Knights Templar. It's a superb carved memorial to both the Templars and the Holy Grail, and is a centre for pilgrimage by the worldwide Brotherhood of Freemasons, who claim to be the natural successors to the Templars. Nearby, Roslin Castle is the ancient family home of the St Clairs, and although the castle was destroyed by Cromwell's Roundheads after the Battle of Dunbar, the magnificent chapel was left largely unharmed. Such an impressive monument would surely have been built with a practical purpose in mind, but to date, nothing of significance has yet been found here.
However, back to our own search.
On the island's south side, two buildings stand out from their very ordinary surroundings. This is Norfolk Crescent, part of a lavish development planned for the island back in the early 19th century. During the time that the Reverend Charles Hardy was Vicar of Hayling Island, plans were laid down by local landowners to build a grand resort to rival Brighton and Bath. Work commenced in 1830 with the construction of cottages for the key workers. This was followed by the initial major buildings, such as one side of the Crescent, the Royal Hotel and the reading rooms.
The driving force behind the scheme was William Padwick, a local solicitor who had purchased the title of the Lord of the Manor of Hayling from the Duke of Norfolk. He was joined in the venture by the Sandyman family of port fame and other Scottish businessmen. Examination of contemporary documents shows something of the plan. This was to be a prestigious development for top people, and apart from the Crescent,
would have little high-density housing. It was an odd mixture of late Georgian and Victorian Gothic styles, but the early architects' proposals give us a flavour of the developers' lofty intentions. What is significant is that as well as the extensive reading rooms, there was also to be a library, and one of quite staggering proportions. If we compare the proposed area of the intended library on the map with that of the half-finished crescent, it has been estimated that the library, complete with portico, Ionic columns and all the trimmings, could well have been as large as the completed Royal Hotel at the east side of the development. With a 120-foot frontage and 4 stories in height, it would have been a truly impressive building. Not exactly your local lending library.
Our present library isn't as large as the former reading rooms, but it adequately serves 18,000 residents. So one wonders, what was the purpose of the originally proposed library in an area with only 600 inhabitants? As a centre for the study of Hayling's secret past, perhaps?
Interestingly enough, we can still find books here dealing with our main topic, so things haven't changed much in 170 years, have they?
It seems likely that all this coincided with a discovery made by the Reverend Charles Hardy at St Mary's Church. We suspect that, during building work, he uncovered an ancient cache of documents hidden by the monks of Jumier many centuries earlier. These are believed to have had immense significance for the perceived understanding of the Gospels and the early history of the Holy Land and the Christian Church. We also wonder whether Hardy was told by his superiors that the time was not yet right for such revelations, and that he should put his finds back where he found them. At precisely the same time, it appears that the plug was pulled on the grand plan for South Hayling. It's popularly believed that they ran out of money, but these were substantial businessmen and landowners of their day, not underfunded speculators. So it seems more likely that they got a clear direction from the top to let matters rest, and thereby lost the whole reason for the development.
There was still a surge of building, however, led by many of those closely involved with the scheme. Staunch Scottish Rite Freemasons such as the Sandymans and the McEwens built themselves grand houses in extensive grounds along the island's south shore. Incredibly, in the space of a century, most of these were torn down to make way for the anonymous suburbia that Hayling Island is today. And all that's left of the largest houses are the odd cottage, coach house or perimeter wall. And this crest from the Sandyman's house preserved at Hayling Golf Club. This location, with its bubbling spring water, is in nearby Havant. For 2,000 years it was a major centre for the parchment industry, and so we're told provided material for the original Magna Carta documents. The local water supply comes from Bedhampton Springs, which yields 100 million litres of water per day, the most prolific in the UK and probably the world. Now there's another nice echo here, because this super pure water from our local rivers and springs, which gave rise to the parchment industry, has its source apparently in the Pyrenees between France and Spain, not a million miles away from our other focal point, Rennes-le-Château. A mysterious underground stream, now that is pretty magical stuff. Medieval monasteries reproduced scriptures, theological writings and chronicles manually. We now suspect that the new priory on out-of-the-way Hayling Island may well have acted as the early church's equivalent of an office and reprographics bureau, using Havant parchment for the covert copying of secret documents. What could be more natural then than to hide some of the copies within the church itself for safekeeping? We believe the monks of Jumier had their first settlement at Pond Head prior to the building of this church, and that the search for secret documents may have been the reason behind Neville Shute's activities during World War II. Secret societies such as the Knights Templar and their latter-day counterparts, the Freemasons, traditionally kept their secrets hidden in underground vaults associated with their Grand Masters' graves. It's been suggested that there may be a crypt here, under the chancel, which was the first part of the church to be built back in 1255 AD. This is particularly significant because it would probably house the remains of a former prior, a man of great local importance, whose memorial can be found in the centre of the chancel itself. The stone's decoration has been identified as a grailed cross, which is a major Knights Templar symbol. It suffered badly over the centuries and was highlighted for restoration to mark the church's 750th anniversary. We hope the work on the memorial provides an opportunity for further detective work. Who knows, perhaps we'll find that our own vicar, Paul Ginevra, is also the unwitting custodian of ancient secrets, similar to those found by the French priest Bérenger Saunier at Rennes-le-Château, way back at the end of the 19th century. Outside the church, the graves of two former vicars, Charles Hardy and Charles Clark, lie together in a very prominent position. Close by the main gate, their gravestones merit close attention and have great symbolism for us in our search. Hardy's is decorated with a floriated cross, while Clark's carries a Knights Templar cross. Pretty odd symbols for Church of England priests, don't you think? Now let's take a deeper look into some of the mysteries surrounding Neville Shute's activities here during World War II, because the World War II seances evidently took place in the Boiler House, now called the Wendy House, and in the Old Salt House here on Coles Quay. And there are still more tales of the supernatural for us to consider.
So this is the Wendy House, where local legend has it Neville Shute held seances during the Second World War with high-ranking officials from London. The supposition is that they were trying to contact the spirits of the Benedictine monks from the Royal Abbey of Jumier who were over here running the Priory of Hayling all those centuries ago.
That's very interesting, because quite recently a lady living near here called in a minister to exorcise a ghost from her house who looked like a Benedictine monk.
Did you know some club members have apparently met the ghost of Charlie Cole here? He once owned the site, and the Salt House was also once rented by W.T. Stead, the Edwardian reformer, and he was an ardent spiritualist to boot.
Well, I'm Wendy Evans, and I certainly find it all a bit spooky. The Wendy House? It's an important day on the St Mary's calendar. Today, we're starting to lift the prior's tombstone before relaying it under a protective glass cover. We hope that this will provide the opportunity to look deeper into the foundations and see if we can find any clues as to what lies below. I've been joined here by Paul Ginevra, the Vicar of St Mary's, who's obviously very interested in the work. So I feel this is quite a privileged moment to be present when this is happening.
Yeah, I mean, this must be a very significant person who's played a very major part in the history of Hayling at some point. So I think all this comes together to show that Hayling is one of Hampshire's holy islands. It's been a very significant place for all sorts of reasons.
Well, the guys have dug down about 3 feet, and unfortunately we haven't found anything of interest. Just a few lumps of clay and some pretty big rocks. So no Holy Grail this time, but we've still got plenty of places to look on this island. Mind you, when the stone came out, the similarity to the 2 vicars' gravestones just outside the church here was pretty striking, wasn't it?
Extensive repair work was carried out in Victorian times, so it now seems likely that the floors and their foundations were also restored at the same time, which would account for why the groundwork looks so fresh and clean. Clearly, other searchers have already had a look.
I'm here at Sparks Marina with Victor Pearce-Jones. We're about to have a meeting with Frank Dunster to discuss our visit to Tornaby Woods over there.
Frank tells me that there was a religious community established at Tornaby long before Roman times. He believes this site, on the shores of My Lord's Pond, was the location of the original Benedictine Priory following the Norman Conquest. As this busy working harbour is Frank's home base, it makes a splendid springboard for the next stage in our quest. Apparently there were extensive brickworks on Tornaby from Roman times right through to the 1900s. Apart from local buildings, the bricks were used in the construction of drainage tunnels throughout the island. The Benedictine monks were adept in tunnel work and once built a tunnel from the old manor house to St Mary's Church. Frank believes that there may be another ancient tunnel close by, which could lead us to a long-lost secret hiding place.
King David originally captured Jerusalem via a secret tunnel under the city of Jerusalem. This tunnel connected the pool of Siloam to the Gihon Spring, which was outside the city of Jerusalem. This tunnel was later further developed by King Hezekiah, who reigned about 700 years before Christ. And he developed this tunnel as a hiding place for the Jews' most sacred treasure. This tunnel meandered somewhat, but ultimately it measured exactly the sacred Jewish measurement of 1200 cubits. The Knights Templars knew all about the tunnel system, but even so it took them 2 decades to locate and remove the loot, because there were all sorts of traps and false trails made for them by the ancient priests.
Sounds a bit like the Indiana Jones films.
Yes.
Yes, indeed, they were based on historic fact. Well, anyway, we're looking for a well or a spring that will give us access to a tunnel to take us to the pond at Menjum House, and a tunnel between the two of some 1200 cubits in length.
What kind of distance are we talking about now?
Something in the region of about 560 yards.
Well, I can't wait to get over there. So, Tornaby Woods, chaps.
That's no problem, because I happen to know the owner.
Excellent.
Exciting news! Frank has located the well deep in Tornaby Woods. And we've got the go-ahead to start excavation. So today, we're off to take a look at the initial work on the site.
So, there it is, Tornaby Woods.
Nice. Go.
It's just a fabulous part of the island, Frank.
Yes, and I've no doubt that's why the Benedictine monks made their first settlement here on the shores of My Lord's Pond. Of course, John of Gisors was educated by the Benedictines, and he had a big impact on the whole area in the late 12th century.
Right.
He was the first to capitalise on the direct sea route from the mouth of the Seine when he saw the potential of Portsmouth harbour.
So he was an important guy then.
Indeed he was. He was the nephew of the first Grand Master of the Knights Templar, and he married Marie Sinclair, whose family built Roslin Chapel some 200 years later.
Really?
He was also the first Grand Master of the Priory of Zion, and almost certainly financed the building of the Priory Church of St Mary's, less than a mile from here, including those tantalising sculptures.
I see.
Among his many titles, he was known as Lord of Gisors, so perhaps that explains My Lord's Pond.
Clearly, My Lord's Pond has been a stopping off point for foreign ships for thousands of years. Phoenicians, Celts, Romans, Normans, you name them, they all came here. Here we are in Tornabury, and we can't wait to examine the well site. A start has been made to clearing the debris from the top of the well,
It's a massive structure.
and although the water level is still quite high, it's been lowered sufficiently for us to get a good view, and it certainly revealed a most impressive opening. Before excavating further, we've called in local builder Dave Wilson and brickmaker Noel Pycroft for their opinions. Noel's family have been brickmakers on Hayling for generations, and there's not much he doesn't know about the history of bricks and wells.
So now we've exposed the top layer of bricks of that well, how do you date it?
By the thickness of the bricks and the frog. Well, I think according to the bricks they've got frogs in, and that's got to be after around about 1800, and I assume it's probably a well for water when they made a lot of bricks when the development of Hayling started, which was in about 1824.
So that's what you think it was for?
That's my assumption. It's only assuming, because if it was an older one, the bricks would be narrower, thinner, and no frog.
It's a huge well though.
It's a big well, but there is one over in Salton's house, a similar well, but it's more barrel shaped, came in at the top. Well, this one could have come in at the top, couldn't it?
Well, it's not quite the answer that we were all hoping for, and the team are obviously very disappointed, but it is interesting to think that it may have been dug in anticipation of the major production for the 19th century crusade development. And it also may have replaced a much older well. After all, this is arguably the most historic part of the whole island. It looks like Tornabury is going to hold on to its secrets for a little bit longer. To tell you our island story, we've travelled from ancient Rome to the Holy Land, from medieval France to Scotland, and we've looked at some mysterious goings-on in the 19th century in Rennes Chateau and Hayling Island, and we are still left with a huge puzzle. Well, as one door closes, another one opens. And we do have some good news. Since starting our dig at Tornabury, our ongoing research has thrown up some interesting new support for our central theory. Jean Macala, an authority on Celtic and French medieval history at the Sorbonne, has written that he has no doubt that the Templar treasures, in whatever form, were not taken from Paris to La Rochelle in the west in 1307. He believes that they were taken north via Jumier in the Seine to England, and he is amazed that the English haven't made more of it. This has encouraged us to take a closer look at St Mary's, and possibly a more accessible hiding place. By the way, this yew tree is over 2,000 years old, so this has always been a special place. The Lord of the Manor, William Padwick, a major figure in the Crescent development, was buried here along with several members of his family during the 19th century. As we've already said, the position of the prior's tombstone suggests that he was buried under the chancel too. Now, I can't imagine that they would have dug up the floor every time, and we've always suspected there must be a crypt under here, and there would have been an entrance somewhere. The most likely access would have been through the present vestry, with its stout door opening inward, by the way, and down these steps, the only lower level in the entire church. It now seems certain that originally there must have been more steps here, from inside the vestry and possibly down into the crypt. Apparently, after the last interment in 1915, the Bishop of Winchester ruled that the entrance to the burial chamber be permanently sealed. Now, it seems that the vestry was largely rebuilt about this time, and the vicar in those days, the Reverend Charles Henry Clark, the one buried outside the chancel with a Templar cross on his grave. Clearly then, these carvings do have a tale to tell us. Well, they are reputed to be the finest church carvings anywhere in the country, other than in the great cathedrals. Now, these outside the vestry door are especially fascinating. It's even been suggested that this one is very youthful, even feminine in appearance. Shades of Mary Magdalene and the Da Vinci Code, perhaps? Even more curious, if we look closely in the correct light, isn't that a teardrop under the right eye? In ancient Egyptian mythology, the golden tear from the eye of Horus was directly associated with godly attributes. And there's even more evidence to convince us that St Mary's may hold some fascinating secrets. Victor Pearce-Jones.
The carvings in St Mary's are quite simple, not overly elaborate, especially when compared to their French counterparts, but I find some of them very interesting indeed. I'm most taken by the image of the Queen near the Lady Chapel. Sadly, she was badly defaced centuries ago, but Grail expert Andrew Sinclair has confirmed our view that this is Queen Eleanor of Aquitaine, who was married to King Henry II of England. At the time, she was the most powerful woman in Europe and ran a sumptuous royal court. And of course, her troubadours were the first to tell the stories that spread the Grail legend, there at the court of Queen Eleanor all those years ago. So it's exciting to identify this carving as the image of a major figure at the very heart of the Grail story, a truly significant person.
A significant person indeed, but we've one more revelation to support our theories. The most potent images of all can be found adjacent to the chancel. These bear a striking resemblance to figures depicted in an old painting of a Knights Templar gathering at the Paris chapter house. This shows a high priest to the left, a king to the right, and a pair of mournful-looking scribes recording the proceedings. The scene is replicated here in carvings at the entrance to the chancel. A high priest to the left, a king to the right, and a pair of mournful-looking scribes recording the proceedings. All understated, but plainly there to be seen and understood. This representation of a chapter house ceremony suggests that the descendants of the Knights Templar may have created a secure place here to hide their secrets and practice their ceremonies, and that could explain why the monks of Jumier built such a spacious chancel in the first place. So we've little doubt that the answer to our quest lies here at St Mary's after all, and a grand scan would be interesting. But then, perhaps we've already done enough to highlight Hayling's claim to be the secret island of the Holy Grail. On the other hand, some scholars believe that the whole thing was made up by the 12th century writer Chrétien de Troyes in his story Le Roman de Parzival, and it's all snowballed from there. Mind you, he was commissioned by a Templar cousin of John of Gisors.